Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today I'm here taking a look at an extraordinarily rare World War I German Flieger's rifle. Actually, this is the infantry rifle version of what became known as the Flieger Selbstlader Karabiner, the Flyer's self-loading rifle. These were a product of the Mauser company, Paul and Wilhelm Mauser, who had spent really a couple decades trying to develop a good mechanism for a self-loading rifle. They went through a whole bunch of different mechanisms, long recoil, short recoil, gas-operated guns, the works. And ultimately, this is one of the few types that actually made it into German military service. Now, this is the scaled up, basically mechanical copy of the Mauser 1906/08 pistol, which looks externally kind of like a broom handle Mauser, although it's really mechanically totally different. I have a video on one of those pistols, which you might be interested in watching as a companion piece to this. At any rate, this is a flapper-locked, recoil-operated rifle. However, it's typically when we think of recoil-operated, we think of the barrel moving. In this case, the barrel is fixed in place, and what we actually have here is a spring-loaded, recoil-operated cam plate right here in the back of the receiver, and that's what moves under recoil to unlock the rifle. It then has a pair of large flapper locks, similar to, say, a Degtyarev system, and we'll take a look at those when we bring the camera in for a closer shot of this. Anyway, mechanically, it's a very cool looking system. There was a ton of work and engineering and machining that went into making these guns. Unfortunately, they didn't work out very well in practice. Now you'll see these referred to as both 1915 and 1916 pattern guns. There doesn't really appear to be a mechanical difference between the two, it's just nomenclature. And some of this is kind of confused. There's not a ton of information about these out there. At any rate, there was both this standard infantry version, which of course has standard Mauser hardware. We have a bayonet lug, cleaning rod, the stowage hook for the sling, all that material. There was also a carbine version, which was used by aircraft and Zeppelin crews. That is pretty distinctive for having a stock cut off about halfway up. It's got a wooden sort of vertical front grip slash front support for the magazine right here. Well, those are the two obvious differences, and the barrel's a little bit shorter. Now, interestingly, the carbines are more common today by a factor of like 2. There's significantly more carbines than there are infantry rifles. That said, there are only, as far as I know of, 2 of these infantry rifles still existing, and then maybe 6 or 8 or 10 of the carbines. So neither one of them is common by any stretch. This is also interesting in that it is one of the very few German rifles of the period that actually used a detachable box magazine. This looks like a later MG13 magazine. It's not, although if you have one of these and you're missing the mag, the MG13 is the best replacement to start with. This is a 25-round magazine. It's chambered for the standard 8x57 Mauser cartridge, which is what these rifles used. And initially, the idea was to give soldiers in the field the firepower of a semi-auto rifle. The problem is, because of the somewhat finicky nature of the recoil system and the very tight machining tolerances and clearances, these weren't reliable guns in the field. So, I mean, in the field, they were like really not reliable guns. So they took them and decided, well, they'll work better if they're up in airplanes where they're not getting full of mud. And they did work better in aircraft. However, in general, the use of self-loading rifles as aerial armament ended fairly quickly once they started putting machine guns in aircrafts and Zeppelin, because the machine guns were far better in every way. And it just took a little while before the machine gun technology was developed a little bit better and the aircraft were developed a little bit better and could handle a little more weight. Once machine guns became feasible, they were the obvious solution for arming aircraft. There were a couple other self-loading rifles that were used by the Germans, most notably Mondragon rifles purchased from Switzerland. The Mexicans had contracted for the manufacture of those guns and then backed out, which left SIG in Switzerland with a large stash of Mondragon rifles that they didn't know what to do with. So they did actually rechamber some in 8mm, gave some to the Germans or sold them to the Germans for testing. The Germans never ultimately bought those in substantial quantities. And ultimately, both the Mondragons and these Mauser Flieger rifles were dropped in favor of full machine guns for aircraft use. I think with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and take a closer look and pull the top cover off this so that you can see how it works, because, oh man, it looks really cool inside. All right, let's start by taking a look at the markings. There are only a couple of markings on these rifles. On the left side of the receiver, we have the manufacturer's mark here, Waffenfabrik Mauser AG Oberndorf, Mauser's patent 1916. Then moving up, on the back of the barrel, we have a bore diameter marking, 7.90. That's 8 millimeter. These changed by a few hundredths of a millimeter. You'll see sometimes rifles marked 791, for example. But that's just the exact bore diameter. And then, lastly, we have a marking up here on the top of the barrel over the chamber, which is the serial number. It's got a prefix S, and then this one is number 272, and then a K suffix. In total, probably only about 600 of these guns were made, both rifles and carbines combined, and all of the known examples follow this same serial number pattern with the S prefix and the K suffix. Exactly what those mean, I don't know. You could speculate that the S might stand for Selbstlader or self-loader. No idea about the K, however. The highest known serial number is 566. You'll see a lot of different estimates for how many were made, up to, like, some people will say up to like 2,000. Seems more likely to me that the number is probably smaller, 600, 700 maybe, something in that range. Now, looking at the mechanical features of the gun, let's start with the magazine. Like I said, this is a 25 round magazine, 8 millimeter Mauser. To remove the magazine, we have a mag release button here in the front of the trigger guard, which does something a bit unusual. It actually releases the entire trigger guard, which drops down. The magazine catch is actually just a plunger that comes out right inside here, locks the mag in place. And when you pivot this down, the plunger is attached to the front of the trigger guard itself. So this pulls it back out of engagement, and we can then pull the magazine out. This magazine's pretty stiff. Whether that's a characteristic of the design in general or just this example, I don't know. I should point out that while I don't know about the infantry rifles, the aviation carbines were actually issued with a transit chest of magazines and came with either 5 or 6 magazines, all serial numbered, each matching each carbine. So they actually issued a lot of magazines with these guns. So there's our magazine. Looks very much like an MG13 mag, and they are similar but not interchangeable. Now, moving on, we'll go ahead and snap the magazine or the trigger guard back in place, the magazine catch back, but I'm leaving the magazine out just to make the rifle a little handier. This big lever on the side is our safety. When you rotate it down, it locks the trigger, and it also locks the bolt from opening. And then push it back up to fire, obviously. And that's pretty much it for controls on the gun. Not a whole lot else going on, except for the actual mechanical workings, which I'm sure is what you've been waiting for. So the two major elements here that are exposed are this knurled plate, which expands across the top of the rifle. This moves forward under spring tension. And then we have our gigantic winged bolt handle here, which is quite easy to grasp. It's cut out in the center so that you can see the sights through it. Kind of like the charging handle on a Thompson subgun, actually. So to open the bolt, what we do is push that plate forward until it locks, and then you can just grab the bolt and pull back. This does lock open on an empty magazine. However, it doesn't have a specific hold open feature or a mechanism. So when you pull the magazine out, the bolt simply drops closed. And there's no way to manually lock it open without the magazine. Fortunately, we don't need to. What we are going to do is now take off this rear top cover and expose the mechanical workings of the action. So the first step is to take this little tab and push it out that direction. It's fairly stiff. Then this whole top cover comes off. And there is the oh my god, complicated and expensive to manufacture internal. So what we have in there are two of these flappers, and they've got pins in the top and bottom here to locate them, and then they've got this roller bearing on the top, and that is used to control where they're positioned. So you've got two of them in here. There we go. And when the gun is ready to fire, they are held in position like this, so you can see that they prevent the bolt from moving backwards, because they're holding onto it. Then the recoil-operated plate, what it does is actually pull these to the sides like this, where they're now no longer obstructing the bolt, and the bolt can cycle backwards in between them. That's your main recoil spring. See the top of the bolt up here. Like so. Now the way this plate actually works is that it has to move forward when the rifle is fired. So it's in this position, and this is a recoil-operated piece. So because of inertia, when the rifle is fired, this piece, which is free to move, wants to stay where it is while the rest of the rifle moves backwards, like that. That causes this plate to, in effect, move forward relative to the rest of the rifle. And when it moves forward, the two roller bearings move from this front position, where they're being pulled inward and locking against the bolt. They move to this outer position, where they're now out of the way of the bolt, allowing it to cycle. That's what's going on here. Now, there is a second little spring latch right here, which is what's holding this plate locked in the front. That is on there to allow you to easily manually cycle the rifle. Because when it's at rest, this spring-loaded plate is backwards, and it's holding the bolt, the flaps in the locked position so that you can't open the bolt. For example, if you wanted to cycle the bolt because you ran the magazine dry, you replace the magazine, then you have to rack the bolt. In order to do that, you push this forward, and this little spring catch right here snaps into place. That allows you to not have to hold this while you try and move the bolt. This locks in place, the gun is now unlocked, and then you can cycle the bolt by hand to, say, chamber a cartridge. However, they built in another little detail to it. You can see there's this little triangular tooth, and when I push that down, it unlocks the plate. Snaps back. That tooth runs in this little track in the bolt. So what happens is I can lock the bolt, I can lock the flaps open so that I can cycle the bolt by hand. But as soon as I move the bolt back, that little tooth is pushed up, which disconnects the cam plate. So as soon as I start to cycle the bolt, it moves back, and then when I let go of the bolt, it automatically reverts to its fireable condition. Hopefully that made sense. Basically, the whole thing is a giant workaround to allow you to manually cycle the bolt. You can probably see how this is potentially a pretty finicky system. Recoil-operated guns are always subject to an awful lot of factors, like how stiffly the rifle is held when it's fired, power of the ammunition potentially, and if you don't get it just right, you can end up with a pretty unreliable gun. I haven't found any good original records to check out, but I suspect that the field problems with these guns were a mixture of the system itself being a little too susceptible to just being right on the edge of working and the parts not being exactly balanced, and environmental factors like how the soldier was holding the rifle causing problems, and also its susceptibility to getting dirt and mud in it, because it doesn't take a lot in this to make things not really work quite so well. Like I said, ultimately total production I suspect was like 600. They did see use in World War I. That's part of the reason there are so few today, is this combination of not many being made in the first place, plus you're going to throw them into the Western Front or into German aircraft, and they're all going to get lost in combat over time. These were being used in 1916, so you had 2 full years of war in which to have them damaged or destroyed or lost in combat. And as a result, very few of them exist today. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I don't think there are all that many opportunities to take a look up close at some actual video footage of these guns. So It's very cool for me to be able to get a chance to take a look at this one. If you like this sort of content, please consider taking a look at my Patreon page, and if you can hack it, supporting me financially. A donation of $1 a month really goes a long way to helping me continue to bring you guys guns like very cool World War I German aircraft rifles. Thanks for watching.